What would you do if the Earth were in a global collapse? The only chance to get out alive would be entering a ship and traveling for 3,000 years frozen to another planet. But when you wake up, the ship is destroyed, and you are the only survivor. And to make things even worse, you land on a planet infested with aliens that want to devour you. I confess that this work got me hooked from beginning to end. If you like science and suspense, you will like this work. It is a bit complex, so much so that I took a while to make the script. So already hit the like button and leave a comment because it was very hard to bring this video to you. The work begins with the mothership called Atalanta being destroyed. Our protagonist is called Dong, and he was recording a diary. He tells humanity, if it still exists, that the colonizing ship of the Arcadia mission ended up exploding. This mission had the goal of saving humanity by taking it to another planet. However, something happened and it ended up exploding. Planet Earth became uninhabitable, but the reason for that will be told later. With that, several colonization programs were created. The destination was planet Kepler 3265, and the codename for this planet would be Arcadia. But something mysterious ended up happening to the ship that carried a gigantic crew. All the crew members were in hibernation, and the only survivor was our protagonist Dong. The guy didn't know what was going on and was now lost in space. Recording his last message, he hoped his voice would reach Earth. The poor guy had just woken up from a 3,000 years hibernation and didn't understand anything. He even thought that this would be his end because he would be adrift in space. However, he ended up seeing his guitar. Each crew member could take one item, and that was the one he chose. If by any chance this was his end, he would like to spend his last moments with his guitar. His dream of playing in a rock band didn't move forward, and he never imagined that instead of a rock star he would become a man lost in space. There was no air there, so it wouldn't be possible to hear the notes he was playing. But let's be honest, that would be a pretty philosophical ending. When he was about to give up and die in space, he received a warning on his suit. The escape capsule was activated and he could flee to the nearest planet. Luckily, this capsule was coming toward him, and now he wouldn't die floating in space for eternity. The Atalanta escape capsule reaches him and manages to rescue him. He falls hard inside it, and after pulling the lever, he could save himself by landing on the planet just below. This would mean he would give up on his companions. It wasn't certain that they had all lost their lives in the explosion, but he wouldn't take the risk. After pulling the lever, the ejection ship headed toward the planet. This would be the last chance to stay alive. And within moments, he managed to land on an alien planet. The ship activated the parachutes and crashed hard on the ground. He needed to scan to know if the air was breathable. After kicking the door a few times, he managed to open it. He was still dizzy from being frozen inside the ship for 3,000 years. But that place looked like a paradise, better than that hell on planet Kepler 3265. Maybe this would be a better destiny for the Arcadia mission. He activates his emergency radio, trying to contact any crew member or some android from the ship. The temperature was 23 degrees and had 12% oxygen level. From afar, he saw a person wearing an alien suit. The clothes were very similar to the members of the Atalanta crew, so he imagined it was a companion. But at that moment, some slime fell on his visor. It was saliva from a giant alien monster ready to attack him. The claws come at him, and he manages to dodge at the last second. Dong is thrown to the ground. He still wasn't used to the gravity, and now would have to deal with a creature 10 times his size. Logically, he received training to deal with this. After all, this protagonist of ours is an elite soldier, you'll see. The monster had red eyes, and Dong with a small weapon in hand gets ready to counterattack. That little knife didn't seem like it would solve the situation, but it was his only option. He wouldn't stand still waiting for death. Facing this creature head-on would be hard, so he jumps. A smart and strategic fight would be a better option. Since the gravity and air pressure were different, he didn't react fast enough to dodge an attack. With its tail, the creature started tossing him from side to side. In those cases, he would have to try to break free because he could faint. He threw himself from up there and managed to land on top of the creature's head. This guy here is really brave and immediately stabbed the monster with his knife. In all creatures, the weak point was always the eyes, and he knew that's where he had to aim, giving his strongest attack. And that's what he does, and leaves the creature screaming in pain. During the movement, the monster's claws started falling in his direction, and he was crushed by her. His luck was that this spacesuit was resistant. The other soldier was aiming with a weapon, and it was a high-precision rifle. After aiming, he ends up shooting, firing an energy beam that upon hitting the creature causes massive damage, almost enough to eliminate it. And it even seemed like this soldier knew the monster's weak spots. After using the weapon, the soldier charges toward the creature. He goes all in, transforming that rifle into a giant sword. At that exact moment, the monster tries to defend itself, and with the sword in hand, he strikes back. In a precise moment, he manages to split the creature's legs in half. And now with its mouth open, it was the perfect moment to land the final blow. That would be incredible. And when he pulls the trigger, the explosion happens, thus finishing off the monster for good. When it hits the ground, it causes a small earthquake because of how huge the creature was. Seeing that whole scene, our protagonist realized that it was not a crew member from his ship. That was an alien from this planet, so he thanks with his hands raised. He didn't know if this alien would be friendly or aggressive. So he keeps doing a universal peace pose. He even gets rid of the knife, showing he didn't have threatening behavior. The knife falls to the ground, and the soldier speaks in an unknown language. They really did look like human beings. So Dong decides to show his face by opening his visor. It was to send a message that they were similar even though from different planets. At that moment, we already see that the alien is a woman. She had understood the message and also puts away her weapon, and decides to show her face to him. The guy gets apprehensive. And after she removes the helmet, we see that she was a very beautiful alien. I'm telling you, the women in this story are really cute. The author did a great job. This girl had just saved Dong from a giant monster. He didn't know why this girl had done that, and even less why that monster attacked him. The girl was handing him a bottle to drink from. He looks at that container, unsure if it was safe. His suit scans and detects that the temperature is ambient and the atmosphere contains a lot of ethanol, hydrochloric acid, and methanol. The girl draws a water molecule and keeps saying the word Kai, pointing to the drawing in the sand. He quickly understands that she was offering him water. Would it be safe to open his suit quickly to drink it? And during training, he learned he should try speaking English with beings from other planets since it's an easy language. He thanks in English and not in Korean, and introduces himself saying his name was Dong Young-soo. That language was not understood by our dear blue girl, but she quickly starts to understand the words he was saying and begins to repeat them. Another thing he learned was the universal gesture of shaking hands. Right after that, she took him to her car. The beings of this world had advanced technology, and she was carrying that monster in the back of the vehicle. Talking to the girl, he discovered that the planet is called Bumi, and the intelligent creatures living there are called Bumians. The place was very beautiful, and it seemed those Bumians were peaceful and intelligent. Besides, the climate and landscape of the planet were beautiful, but it would be destroyed in 5 years. Our hero had barely left Earth, which was doomed, and already went to another planet that would be destroyed. During the trip with the girl in her car, he started recording a voice message. He was documenting every moment on this new planet, and discovered through her that the remaining time on this place was very short. They go to a tech base and end up parking the car inside. They go up a ramp to the upper compartments. The dialogue between them was difficult, so he didn't understand this whole destruction thing very well. Upon arriving there, the gates open, and inside the base there were giant mushrooms. Mushrooms everywhere. The girl walks over to another platform, and holding something that looked like a phone, she says a few words. Dong was trying to learn that language and kept repeating her words. It seemed the planet had gone through a recent catastrophe, and he was trying to understand what she was saying. After a while, she started cleaning up that monster. The creature's skin was extremely thick and heavy, and inside the creature there were some valuable parts, and others not so much, and even needed to be removed and thrown far away. The mushrooms were carnivorous feeders, and that was new to Dong, who keeps recording everything in his virtual diary. It was the first time he had seen a mushroom feed on monster flesh. Until then, he was just observing and decided to help her. After offering help, she kept pointing to show what he should do. Our protagonist grabs some of the creature's legs, and she thanks him because it was tiring work. After some time, they finished dividing the creature. They had only been together for a few hours, and she was already able to say a few words in English. They both thanked each other for helping one another, but there were no more words they could understand, and it created an awkward moment. She gets off the truck and says she's going to get something. After going to her machine, she starts saying that she would like to learn English. Dong thinks that it is some kind of computer with artificial intelligence. She was learning the human language very quickly, and all that alien equipment catches his attention. On top of the table, there were some sculptures made of stone. He thought it was beautiful and asked if she made that by herself. When she noticed he was looking at her sculptures, she got scared and quickly took them from his hand. In a cute and funny way, she tried to hide them so he wouldn't see. The guy already starts wondering what the problem with that was. And he also noticed that the Boomians were all clumsy and shy. During the course to become a colonizer, he learned that he should try to connect with the natives. And one way to do that was to show a smile. And he even tried to smile by making a scary face, scaring the girl. It seems that being frozen for 3,000 years wasn't very good for his facial nerves. Another tactic was to give a thumbs up, but in some cultures that could be seen as an offense. So another gesture would be to make a heart. But the way we make the heart is symbolic since the organ doesn't have that shape. Even so, he tried. and left the girl surprised, as if she recognized it. Then he made the heart and pointed to her sculpture, signaling that he liked it. The Boomians were quite intelligent, and she immediately offered her little figure to him. And with blushing cheeks she said it was a gift. Those sculptures were called Balaya, and it looked like a little pig. He said that she was very talented, leaving the girl embarrassed. Right after that she pronounced his name. She pointed to her table, showing other sculptures she had made. When she reached the table, she got very excited, and even activated a projected image to show what the creatures look like in real life. At that moment, he realized that Balaya was not the name of the sculpture but rather the animal. And very excited she showed other sculptures and the image of the creatures. Dong recorded everything in his virtual diary because the animals were very different from the ones found on Earth. Meanwhile, she was showing all the sculptures she had made. She was saying many words and he wasn't understanding any of them. And when comparing with the monster that attacked him, he realized they were very different. It seemed that monster wasn't from this planet. She asked why he was thoughtful. And since he knew she liked animals, he decided to show her some pictures. If there's one animal that everyone likes, or at least almost everyone, it's the kitten. And he immediately shows her a photo of his pet. In the course he took for colonizers, it said that he should use English to talk to aliens. And also that he should look for something in common with them to make friends. And that's exactly what he was doing by showing her pictures of animals. The girl had learned the word cute, and so she started repeating it non-stop, saying the cat was cute. She repeated those words like a child, and our hero said he would teach her other words. The guy even felt happy because he had imagined he would be the last surviving person and would have to spend the rest of his life alone. It seems that our protagonist liked the girl so much that he kept showing her videos of his cat. But there was something he liked even more, which was his guitar. And he asked Langit to wait a little because he was going to get something. After so many words he discovered that her name was Langit. After a few seconds he comes back with his guitar and is surprised that it didn't break. He repeats her name, leaving the girl surprised. Speaking in English and very slowly he said that he liked music. And asks if she knows what music is. At that moment he starts playing the guitar. A robot approaches very fast. And keeps repeating Langit's name. The girl turns to the robot, and he was desperate, bringing urgent news. As if something dangerous had happened. Our hero was trying to make a serenade for the girl, but was interrupted. The robot brought the news that her father was poisoned. She was surprised, asking where her father was. Because he was desperate, the little robot couldn't speak properly. And we see that the guy was turning red. Our hero didn't understand this alien language. But he realized it was about someone or a danger called Ingress. Without thinking twice, they run over there. The base was very big and it took a while to reach the place. It seemed that the door could only be opened from the inside because it had a password. Or maybe the door was simply jammed. It seemed that was what she was trying to do. Contact her father, but was not succeeding. After using a lot of strength, the door didn't move even a little. When analyzing with his suit, he noticed that the door's track was broken. Maybe there was a very strong impact on the door for that to happen. And the desperate girl kept trying to open it. Since they were shorter than humans, they didn't have enough strength to do that. The little robot says that it would be impossible to open the door using only hands. And it seems that they had the antidote for the poison, and even decides to hand it to the girl. Dong asks them to step back. The guy was an elite soldier, and his suit was highly technological. With that he managed to break the door, making them enter quickly. The girl's father was lying on the ground very weak with a red body. She screams the name Ingress, and besides turning reddish, he was also releasing pink smoke from his mouth. Next to him were some capsules releasing a reddish liquid. Dong imagines it's some kind of hormone that the Boomians took. She calls the little robot, who goes to her backpack to get another device with a blue liquid. Watching that scene, he imagines the liquid is a stabilizing hormone. She shakes the capsule and places it on her father's belly to release the medicine. The liquid is injected into the body, making him gradually return to his original color, which is light blue. The girl asks if her father is okay and he says yes, but realizes that there is an alien race in his base, and keeps looking at our hero in that flashy outfit. Our hero listens to that conversation between father and daughter without understanding anything. It seemed like he didn't feel safe with Dong. After all, he was the alien race from the point of view of the Boomians. To his surprise, these people had the technology to create robots with artificial intelligence. And the little robot asked him to follow it. These machines had an easier time learning languages. But learning a language from another planet wasn't that easy. It wanted to show something, and starts pointing to the screen saying its name was Haiji. Dong says it's a pleasure to meet him. Instantly Haiji learns to speak English, and starts to explain a bit about the planet. He was pointing with his arms to some images. This planet was called Boomi, and up to that point our hero already knew. Then explains that the planet will be destroyed in about 5 years. The star they orbit is called Painon, but the robot's English wasn't that good, and it was a bit hard to understand what it was trying to say. And after some time explaining, he understood that there is a meteor called Ragbat, and this meteor has some connection to the destruction of the people. He imagines that this meteor is what will destroy the planet. The girl shows up with her father, who was already healthy. The little robot explains to the man that the alien is named Dong. The man introduces himself as Ingress. This story about the meteor really catches his attention. So he asks if what the robot was saying was true. The man explains with a little difficulty that the meteor fell on this planet. The explosion was gigantic, and at that moment our protagonist gets even more confused. It was hard to understand if the meteor had already fallen, or if it was still going to fall. The girl hands him his guitar. The robot realized that the human wasn't understanding. It kept drawing a circle as if it were the orbit of planet Bumi around the star. This planet took one cycle to complete its orbit. In other words, they had 5 years of life because that was the time left before the meteor impact. The meteor would fall on planet Bumi and everyone would be destroyed. The guy was already desperate because now he understood exactly what they were trying to say to him. Dong had just escaped Earth, survived an explosion on his ship, and now landed on a planet that would also be destroyed. In the end, it might have been better to stay on Earth. The scene shifts to a character waking up very confused. A robot appears telling him to grab his belongings, as that would help recover his memory. He didn't understand anything where he was or who he was. With that guitar in hand, he wonders why he was there. Strangely, he could play the notes with precision. The only thing he remembered was the music he used to play. He started remembering playing the guitar alone at the Houston Space Base. His friend was named Dean, and he had the dream of playing in a band. His friend sang along with him, and they streamed it online. The guy's dream was to play in a band for 100,000 people, and every time he dreamed of that he felt happy. The robot returns asking him to say his name, rank, position, and mission. This was our hero, Dong Youngsu, chief of the maintenance section of the Atalana ship. The robot recognizes the name and mission and asks for the designated code. He spells the word Rockstar, and we return to the present with him remembering that scene. His mission was to keep the ship safe and protect the members of his team. But he failed in both missions, because the ship was destroyed and his companions are missing. However, the ship was too big to be completely destroyed, and it could be the key to saving those people. So he says with full confidence that he won't let the Boomas die. This story is about to get even more intriguing, so go ahead and leave a like and a comment. When I was reading this, I couldn't stop theorizing about what happened to the ship and where his companions were. Our hero had an idea to save these people. He started searching through some books he had in his bag. The robot starts reading all that information to learn more about the human language. What he really wanted was a book about the ship. The robot had found some interesting information. There were some letters with images, and he teaches the robot a few words. And everything that was said, that machine stored in its memory. The Boomians watched apprehensively because this human could be the key to saving them. And while everyone was anxious, the robot was learning to read. It would be important to teach the robot to speak English, to communicate better with the Boomians. And so he starts repeating the words and making gestures. Also, the robot could understand perfectly. And within a few moments, the little robot says it has learned, and starts reading the content of the book. Hiji was very smart, and begins flipping through quickly to read all the remaining content. Our hero watches without saying anything, and within a few seconds, he had read all the pages. Now speaking perfect English, he says he understood all the human grammar structure, so Dong says he can explain properly, and says he knows a way to destroy the meteor. He couldn't pilot the ship to flee far away, but the ship could cause an explosion. If they could locate the ship, they could throw it against the meteor. The girl's father was listening to everything, and the robot says that Ingress is curious to know about this method. With a chemistry book in hand, he decides to explain. It would be a bit complicated to go over all the physics basics with them. So he looks for the periodic table and explains how the elements work, and next he explains everything in detail to the little robot. It would be important for him to learn about that. And lastly, the most important piece would be oxygen. 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule formed water, and the robot says it knows that. The guy is surprised because it seemed the people of that planet already had chemistry knowledge. But there was something called Appleton that humans had discovered. The little robot gets curious and starts reading that information. That was the famous dark matter. This substance could not be observed with light and only reacted to gravity. This fact makes the robot curious. It didn't matter if they didn't understand what dark matter was. What mattered was that they could use it to save the planet. It's going to be a flashback to before the space mission, with them discovering how to use dark matter. Some scientists were observing the explanation. With this new discovery, intergalactic travel would be possible. The biggest problem for these trips was fuel. However, space was full of dark matter, so they would be able to refuel the ship during the journey. They even show a prototype of an engine that used dark matter. That was just the initial project, but it already gave them an idea of how it would work. The maintenance chief was Dong, our hero. After greeting the engineer, they move on to the next part of the explanation. The students were learning about these concepts to become colonizers. That was the symbol of the Atalana, the ship that would save humanity. To become colonizers, they would need to follow strict rules. The guy asks what missions were written in that notebook, and the guy explains it's a sequence for the ship's self-destruction. This information scares the guy. That ship had an antimatter bomb more powerful than all the bombs on Earth. That's because Arcadia was a planet similar to Earth and could have intelligent civilization there. Maybe they evolved in the same way some scientists believe humans evolved, and if by chance they posed a threat to humans, they would explode the ship on the planet. That would be necessary to ensure that humans wouldn't be hunted by those aliens. Dong's mission was exactly that. If the aliens posed a threat, he could use the ship to blow everything up. The little robot gets scared, saying it would be dangerous. But the man, who also seemed to be a scientist, sees a glimmer of hope in it. Contradicting Ingress, Hiji thinks the human is not trustworthy, and hears the little robot speaking in the alien language, something that suggests Dong could be evil. This really was a scary idea, so they start discussing whether it was a good plan. After all, it could be our hero tricking them just to help find his ship, and in the end, want to blow up the entire planet Boomy. However, they think for a bit and decide what they would do. Our protagonist confirms by saying he would like to find the ship's engine together with them. The group asks why Dong gave them this information. Because he would need allies, so he decided to tell the truth. He wanted to use the power that humanity possesses, and he would do that to save Boomy. He extended his hand and said that if they accepted a deal, they should shake hands. Logically, they were suspicious of the guy, but in the end they shake his hand, because they had no other choice but to believe him. It would be a risky mission because the ship was in space around the planet. Everyone holds his hand. It would be a difficult mission, but they would need to believe. The little robot says it didn't understand the man's last words because they weren't in the dictionary. He repeats saying he would do everything to save the planet Boomy. It seems that this was just a test by the robot to see if the guy was lying or not. And so the little robot agrees to help, placing its little hand. The first mission would be to track the ship, and then find a way to reach it. The scene flashes back to when they were receiving training and the doctor said the trip would last 3,000 years. The students were paying attention because this mission was super important. When they arrive on the other planet, maybe humans on Earth will already be extinct. And if they are still alive, they won't have the technology they have today. It was super important that the humans sent there were trained because they would be the hope of humanity. And with the book in hand, he said that everything they need to learn is recorded there. Our hero was rereading that book and writing down important information. It was as if that training had happened just a few days ago. Everything was still fresh in his mind and he knew he would need to modify his suit. Ingress was a mechanical scientist and could make the necessary modifications. This suit was made for space and not for resistance combat. Besides, his body was not adapted to the planet, so the suit would need powerful batteries. For that, they would explore planet Boomy in search of technology to find the ship in space. The little robot suggests attaching a respirator directly to the helmet. Besides, this modified helmet would make it easier to use the Boomian weapons. The scientist said it would be possible but wanted to analyze it better. That helmet had communication functions. It was a part that would no longer be used, so they could remove it. The suit also contained water tanks to regulate temperature. If he spent too much time without the suit, he felt a buzzing in his ear. That was because he still wasn't adapted to the atmospheric pressure. This large pressure difference caused dizziness and nausea. If he were exposed long term, it would have bad consequences. By removing the backpack cover of the suit, they see the oxygen tank. It would be possible to keep reusing the planet's oxygen to fill the tank. But for that, some changes would be necessary. In the meantime, he would use a temporary respirator. The next step would be to find a base with better equipment to locate the lost ship. In the meantime, he would need to keep doing physical exercise. Being hibernated frozen in the ship for so long left his body weak. Besides, this planet only had mushrooms for him to eat. It was okay to eat those mushrooms, but they weren't very nutritious. Ingress said they could be dangerous if not properly prepared. So he boiled them and then steamed them. They were already used to eating only mushrooms, and maybe that's why their bodies were weak. Anyway, he would need to worry about his long-term health. Besides training, he should look for other sources of protein. The biggest enemy so far was that monster they call Garita. They ended up on this planet through meteors that fell a few decades ago. He had already noticed they weren't native creatures of this planet. The robot explains that those monsters fought the Boomians and they ended up losing the war. With that, those creatures multiplied and took over the planet. Since it would be a threat, Dong asked the robot to teach how to defeat the Garitas. First, he would need to destroy the vital organs, like the brain, the heart, or the lungs. However, they were similar to vertebrates and were resistant. The robot confirmed, saying their shells are very strong, so they should use the Boomian weapons. The weapon called Naga was like an electromagnetic spear that unleashed lightning. It wasn't very hard to use, and Dong had military training. The real problem was when those monsters attacked up close. Langet would help him train in hand-to-hand combat. For that, she puts on a respirator, and upon inhaling that gas, her body starts turning red. Our protagonist's suspicions were right. The Boomians inhaled hormones to become powerful. The Naga weapon could fire 4 times in a row and also turned into a sword. When it became a melee weapon, it could be used for attack and defense. When the attack came from above, she showed the posture he should take. And look how muscular this girl is. Tell me you wouldn't want a juice like that. The robot explains that the weapon should be used with the correct angles. If the attack comes from above, you should point the blade upward. But if the attack comes from below, you should lower the blade. The girl then calls Dong for a training session. He starts mimicking the movements. Then she ends up hitting his weapon, and he blocks it. The pressure he felt from that blow was gigantic. In a real situation, he would need to act quickly. And after understanding, he asks if he can also try. In a combat pose ready for the duel, she says he could go all in. And now the training would get serious. The girl charges with the blade in hand, and the robot is afraid they might get hurt. She tries to attack from the side, and he blocks with the weapon. Since she had used that hormone, her attacks were like the charge of a rhinoceros. She wasn't going to go easy. Later, he writes in his virtual diary, saying that the Boomians became stronger when they used stimulants for combat. One of the sections in his daily log, he reserved to record his songs. According to him, this was important because even on the golden record taken on the Voyager, they recorded music. For those who don't know, that gold record contained music and literature representing Earth. But unlike that record, which contained classical music, our hero was recording rock songs. That would be important if one day he died, there would be some record of who he was. The girl watches from afar while he plays. It seems that on the planet of the Boomias, there was no such instrument called a guitar. After all, she was very curious. After he finishes playing, she says she has something important to say. The spacesuit was ready with the modifications he wanted, so they go over there. Our hero was anxious, and the scientist said it took a lot of work, but he finally succeeded. He had managed to improve the suit for combat missions. His device starts updating the modifications to the suit. The engine of his suit was functioning, and with that, he goes in to do the initial tests. Just by feeling the movement, he realizes he was stronger. After entering, Ingress makes the final repairs. Gradually, the suit begins adapting to the body. Now it was more resistant and had considerably greater strength. The man asks him to put on the helmet to breathe better. Our hero was looking like Iron Man. It was no longer that acrylic helmet. This new armor could withstand attacks from alien creatures. They go outside to run some tests, and after spotting a group of monsters, he prepares to shoot. The Garitas were monsters that moved in packs, so he would need to shoot quickly. The weapon could fire 4 shots, but he would need only 3. The girl was watching from afar to provide support. His hand was stable thanks to the armor, and after aiming well, he prepares to fire. The scene cuts to a few hours earlier when the scientist was explaining the plan. He said there were some bases in this region to track the ship in space. The first radar base was to the south. It was located on the coast and a bit difficult to access, but it could make contact with a satellite. If they wanted more information, they would need to go to the other base to the north. This satellite communication base was located on a mountain with difficult access. If the satellites tracked the Atalante ship, the information would be stored there. But first, he thought it better to go to the coastal base because it could have important resources. On the way to the radar base, he wanted to search for debris from the ship. That's because they could find useful items in the wreckage. This makes the girl curious to know what kind of items humans have. He replies saying they might find weapons, food, and seeds. It seems she had never heard of seeds, but then she understands what the word means and asks if there were cat seeds. The robot gives the last bits of information they would need to know. The girl says she already loaded the car with supplies since the trip would be long. They also took some medicine in case they got injured. And before leaving, the robot wishes good luck to everyone. Lanjet was confident, and her father says the mission will be a success. They just needed to follow all the steps correctly. And so we return to that moment when he was preparing to shoot the monsters. He ends up firing a shot, and a laser beam is released from the weapon toward the creatures. The blast hits the alien's head directly, causing a lot of damage. They start screaming and calling for reinforcements. And shortly after, they go into hand-to-hand combat. He had prepared for this and was wearing a special suit. Even with armor, the fight would be difficult, Since there were only 2 monsters, he could use this battle as a strength test. He would need to wait a few more moments. And when the right moment came, the man told his daughter to shoot. She was in the perfect position. Then they managed to shoot 2 monsters in front, hitting them directly, leaving only 1 alien for Dong to defeat. If the attack came from above, he would have to block from above, but if the blow came from below, he would have to lower the weapon. The girl was tense, worried about Dong. Then she decides to intervene to help him since he was a rookie. She comes down the flowered mountain to fight the creature, and without much difficulty, she manages to split that monster in half. The girl was very skilled, and after defeating the monster, she takes a deep breath. Poor Dong wanted to test the armor but didn't get the chance. He even said it was supposed to be his test fight, and she makes a mischievous face like she couldn't resist the battle impulse. Even the girl's father scolds her, saying it was meant for the rookie. She had good intentions but ended up overriding her father, who was the team leader, so she apologized. Next, the scientist tells Dong to search for the wreckage of the ship. With that, he would go ahead to scan the terrain. He knew the guys sent him ahead to keep catching the daughter's attention. After walking a few meters, he reached the boxes that fell from his ship. It was a large storage compartment for personal items. The black box should be floating in the air holding important information. With the upgraded suit, he begins to climb the compartments. There was a voice recording mechanism there, and he breaks the protective security glass. He decides to remove the case from the black box and listen to the final recordings from the moment of the crash. The ultimate goal of the mission was the safety of the colonists. He listens to the final recording of his friend Dean, saying that Chief Dong would not survive the crash landing. He realized that this was his friend's voice, recorded into Alexia, the ship's operating system. With that, he concludes that he only survived the explosion because of his friend. He kept repeating the safety protocol to Alexia, and asked the ship to eject a safety capsule for his friend, who was drifting in space. No matter what happened, the ship had to save Dong. Our hero saw that it was thanks to his friend that he survived, and wonders how far he made it in the ship, and whether he is still alive. He probably also ejected the ship's supply section so it would fall on the planet. He knew that would be important for Dong. The girl down below asks if he needs help, and our protagonist says he doesn't, and tells her to stay down there holding the things he was going to throw. Next, he throws down some boxes. There were important items there that would be necessary, and this other box with his hands would be useful to see what happened to the ship. He had also brought a friend's diary, which brought him old memories. While he would analyze the items, he asks the girl to rest. And so he starts reading that diary. There was a lot written, and he gets emotional reading it. We see a flashback of when he was receiving training for the trip on the Atalanta ship. Someone calls his name. It was a superior, so he makes a respectful gesture. This was the day he would pass the interview to become a colonist. The girl appears behind him and asks what our protagonist was reading. He explains that it's the diary of a teammate from the Arcadia mission. At the time, his friend didn't know he was a major, and if he had told him, he wouldn't have acted so rudely. Of course, the girl didn't understand anything because she didn't know the meaning of those ranks. She asks if after he finishes reading, she could look at it too, and he said yes. The scene returns to that flashback, where he was greeting one of his superiors. The man says this is Lieutenant Dong, and introduces himself as Alex, saying he saw him training at the Space Exploration Headquarters. But before that, they would do an interview with our protagonist. He says he is a logistics officer and greets them, but they couldn't waste time, and they immediately ask why he enlisted to be a colonist, and ask if his answer is that he would like to protect his own citizens. Our protagonist confirms yes, because that's what he wrote in the report, and that he was also excited to explore an alien planet. All of that was true, but the officer thought he had used artificial intelligence to answer the questionnaire, and even says that this is unacceptable. Besides, they would evaluate his psychological state. Since he was a soldier, the country was aware of his contributions, but even so, the work of a space colonizer was something serious. Not just anyone would pass these tests. Dong had a not-so-good history in adolescence, so he ended up making several mistakes but turned things around. The officer was reading in the report some information and assumed the boy only wanted the mission because of the money left to his family. In response, our protagonist said that was one of the reasons. And with a suspicious look, the man asks if he has any idea how serious this mission is. He was in debt with college, and his mother had health problems, so he really needed the money. And in the report it said that in the past he hung out with delinquent youths to make money. Dong asks how they knew that information. That's because they conducted interviews with people around the participant. The protagonist confirms yes, but says he never committed theft or anything. He only sold electronic devices. And after he went to live with another family, he stopped those activities. In the report it said that he met a streamer girl and got involved with her. And then they start talking about him serving in the army in some battles. They make some compliments saying he proved to be a great soldier even being young, and asked the boy to talk about his combat experience. Then he explains some missions he ended up doing. He even took part in missions for space catastrophes, like meteor falls. Besides, he acted under high pressure in a combat zone. The officer says he heard very good things about him in that aspect. It seemed the boy really was an elite soldier and never failed to complete a mission with excellence. In response, he says he's used to facing big challenges since childhood. The old man asks if he likes challenges to try to escape the trauma he suffered as a child. He finds that a bit strange, and the old man continues saying this boy seems lucky for escaping all the misfortunes of his life. When his parents died, he managed to enlist in the army, and when his companions died in battle, he was the only survivor. And now that Earth was doomed, he also wanted to survive by leaving in a spaceship. The boy says there were moments he really wanted to give up. But anyway, he always had two options, give up or keep fighting. And even going through hardship, he understood that continuing to fight was the best option. The old man mentions that the beneficiary of the pension is registered in the name of that streamer. And to finish the interview, he should fill out her contact information again. All the information obtained on this mission was top secret. After signing, he asks the officer if he had passed the interview. The guy puts his hand on his face and says that's not a question one should ask, and then hands over a booklet of the top secret Atalanta project. The codename of this alien planet exploration was Mission Arcadia. He should read this entire booklet by tomorrow morning. The position he will hold will be Chief of Section 1 of Maintenance, and upon arriving at the base he will be promoted to the rank of Major. But until he boards the ship he will be a simple candidate and student. The boy, without showing much emotion, says he's surprised to have passed the interview. The scientist warns that most of the trip they will spend hibernating, which will last about 3,000 years. Combat experience was a huge advantage for him to get into the project. He could also choose one belonging to take on the mission. And when they say goodbye, they wish everything goes well and that they survive. And he still asks if by any chance the boy drinks. He said he stopped drinking a long time ago. And the old man says he should enjoy and have one last meal before they depart. They say goodbye already thinking that this mission is high risk. Someone else calls his name and says they will guide him to the accommodation. And in this way he goes there. The place was a bit far, and the soldier ends up offering him something. But our protagonist does not accept, and says it's alright, that's because this could be his last cigarette. And that after entering the accommodation he will never be able to smoke again. So the boy ends up deciding to try it, and lights it with a lighter. Outside it was very cold. At no moment did he regret this decision. The plane was waiting for them, and he quickly gets there. Upon entering the aircraft he noticed that his items were already inside. The only thing he decided to bring was his guitar. A guy asks if by chance Dong was a musician. With a bored face he said no, and it was at that moment that he met his friend Dean, who was the maintenance chief, and comments that they are both lieutenants. Actually, our hero was his superior. Outside there was a sign saying that this area was top secret. They arrive at the accommodation. Everyone was anxious for the training. Our hero was the maintenance chief of Team 1. And at that moment Dean saw the badge on his shoulder, and felt embarrassed because he didn't know that his new friend was his superior. Outside it was really cold. A giraffe appears, and she starts eating some grass. Don't ask me why there's a giraffe in the middle of the city under a snowstorm, but she was there cold and eating. Several rockets were being prepared for the mission that would take place in a few weeks. Meanwhile, the crew members were receiving training. Our protagonist drops the box on the table, and his new friend was still feeling awkward. He introduces himself to everyone, and says they will receive some items to read. Asks everyone to raise their hand if they had not received it. And so he starts distributing, and those who received it would lower their hand. Dean goes to our protagonist, and asks if it was him on the plane earlier. Dong says yes, and asks if the guy can help him with the distribution of the spreadsheets. Quickly the guy offers to help. A guy at the back keeps yelling that he hasn't received it yet. After a few minutes, 32 people ended up receiving the items. And so the training for the exploration of an alien planet would begin. This would be a top secret training, and no other person in the world would know about this mission. As some people know, the world is in collapse. And if information about this space exploration leaks, the CIA would investigate them. And not even the United States government knew about this mission. Earth collapsed due to a climate crisis. Tomorrow there would be a written test based on the booklet they received. And they would also do some medical exams, so they should fast. And the main training would start right after breakfast. The first training would be physical conditioning. Since hibernation would wear down the body a lot, they needed to be prepared. Increasing the concentration of muscle and fat mass would be useful for survival on the ship. With that, he starts training with his friend. After one exercise, he says it's time for theoretical classes. But the guy tells Dong he's missing one set. But our hero keeps saying he's done. That's because he didn't want to do leg training. And his friend even gets mad saying he can't skip those exercises. After the test, he congratulates everyone saying they did well. The theoretical classes would take place next, and he would have to participate in those as a student. The test was difficult, so he looks for his friend, and starts asking for the test answer. His doubt was about the answer to question 3. The guy keeps telling him to face forward, but Dong doesn't understand the gesture, and the teacher was in front of him seeing that the boy wanted to cheat. After the theoretical classes came the practical training again. They would train mechanics on a real model prototype of the ship. In these missions, since the journey would last many years, the ship could break down. So it was important that every crew member knew how to do maintenance. Besides, they would learn gardening to grow potatoes and beans. Those were very nutritious foods that would be useful in space. And they start learning all those skills. It would be nice if there was coffee in space, and his friend asks if by any chance he wants to open a space cafe. They had already learned many skills to carry out the mission. Finally, they were testing the space suits. The suit had an exoskeleton that could be used to give more strength. It was like the suit was a superhero costume, he explains. After that, they did combat training. This training would be super important because they might encounter powerful aliens. And he keeps trying to scare his students talking about the creatures. Many of them didn't believe in life beyond Earth. But that was something they would check when they got there. The officer was analyzing everyone during training, and makes some notes and jokes saying that Laika would do better than them. It seems our protagonist didn't know that name. That was a Soviet dog who traveled to space. And the guy gets angry saying they are being compared to a dog. After doing all the training, they would learn about how hibernation worked. And they watched some detailed video about the process. This would be important because the trip would last 3,000 years. An artificial intelligence robot was programmed to help them. This was Alex version number 1. Our protagonist explains to the students that this robot will help during the trip. Besides, each one would receive a cell phone to be able to use. The students go there to receive the device. And his friend starts helping with the tasks. A boy appears and says his name is Chase. He had served in the Navy. And this other girl was called Joyce and said she also likes coffee and heard them talking about it. The robot said it will guide her to the cafeteria to try a drink. The poor girl just wanted to chat with our hero, but the robot ruined everything. Dean apologizes for not recognizing Dong on the plane, and our hero, being a good guy, said it was all right. The guy extends his hand to greet him, and says he will support him as much as possible in this mission to make it succeed. And we see how their friendship started. Thanks to this strong friendship, our protagonist managed to survive. And he reads all this information in his friend's diary. He spent a few hours reading and felt sad. Langat was sleeping next to him, and the girl's father asks why she was outside. The poor girl fell asleep next to our hero because she liked his company. The scientist goes there and asks if they managed to find some interesting items. He said yes, and that tomorrow there would be the best part, and they should take the rest of the night to rest. The girl gets in the back of the car and keeps remembering her friend, because thanks to him, Dong managed to survive. That was quite sad. A balloon was being lifted. The little robot was trying to contact someone, and the girl managed to answer the robot's call. She was on watch. That's why she woke up early and said she would look for her father. It seems the robot had discovered something, and she warns everyone. But the robot gets sad because it would like Dong to wake up too. So they end up shouting to wake him up. The guy jumps out of bed saying he got scared. Now that everyone was up, the robot was going to start a quiz. Langat would be the first to answer the questions in English. She gets very excited playing answering the questions. Meanwhile, the girl's father tells her to focus on the mission. The next to answer the questions would be Dong, but he wasn't paying much attention and couldn't know the answer. He said he was half asleep, and that's why he didn't understand. Our protagonist's disinterest made the robot a little sad, so he kept answering random things. And then said he gave up on the game. He doesn't function well when waking up early in the morning. Sounds like you there who procrastinates waking up to go to school or work. He had called himself fool, and the robot asked what that word meant. The scientist tells the human to sleep a bit and rest. Later, the balloon starts to deflate and loses altitude. They were using that balloon to try to communicate with some base. The protagonist asked the scientist when they will arrive at their destination. The girl discovered the word fool and called him that. Clearly she didn't know what that word meant, so she kept repeating it. Ingris said they would arrive at sunset today, so they should hurry. Since the girl was calling him fool, he kept repeating that word. She was finding it very funny and started laughing like a child. But they needed to hurry and take down the balloon. So our hero goes there to help her. If they arrive too late, it could end up attracting monsters. That's why they depart to the destination. The girl kept watching the landscape outside. Since she was born, she hadn't traveled the whole planet but was locked in this region. Inside the supply boxes there was a human weapon. The scientist asks what kind of weapons those are. He explains that they are in good condition and shoot lasers, but are not loaded. One doubt is if those lasers would be able to defeat the monsters. Dong explains that they are similar to the Boomian's weapons, but these have smaller caliber with faster shots. Besides, there were plasma cutters that cut metal, which makes Ingress excited. He even starts laughing, planning some modifications to make on the weapons. He notices a manga in one of the supply boxes. It was written in Japanese and he didn't understand it perfectly. But those drawings caught the girl's attention, since she was spying on him. Dong asked if she wants to read the book later. That was a school story manga, and he explained to her that it was a language he didn't master much. Unlike this planet, on Earth there were many languages in different regions. This story, for example, was in a language different from the English they were speaking. She got interested because the story took place in a school. He explained that school is a place where young people go to learn, and asked if on this planet they also have that. The girl explains that she learned only with her father and with the robot because she lived her whole life inside the bunker. But just by looking at those illustrations in the book, she feels like studying like the people on Earth. She couldn't understand the writings but could interpret the images. Our protagonist even remembers the time when he was young and had a lot of fun. And he keeps trying to imagine how Langit would be if she were a student. Since the girl was very intelligent, he already imagined her as a nerd, saying she had no time to date. Or else she could very well be a delinquent, since the girl was strong. No matter how she was, he knew he would get along well with her. In his curiosity, he wanted to know if Dong also went to school, and if he found it fun. He said he went to school, and he remembered the time when he studied and suffered bullying. He was a bit chubby and ended up getting beaten. One day he decided to help a person who had been hurt. It was an older guy and he was feeling a lot of pain. Even so, our protagonist was there to help him. An explosion happened, and he saw that streamer girl, who later got involved with him. There were many memories in his mind. Next we see him in a cemetery. He had lost someone important, and that's why he was very sad. All this happened while he was still a teenager and at school. Because he was sad, the girl concluded that school is not as fun as she imagined. The guy calls her saying he has something interesting, and shows a page of the manga saying that child looks like her. That's because the manga character liked cats just like Langit. The character's name was Amani, and meant sound of the sky, just like the girl's name. She asks him to read the story to her later, and he said he could do that. The girl thought the story about kittens was cool, and ends up taking from her backpack a sculpture of a cat she made. With that sculpture in hand, he comments that it was cute, but he hadn't understood it was a cat, and she laughs at his face. Later they arrive near the military base. The place was hard to access, and they watch from afar. The air defense base was on an island, but to get there was not so simple. He would have to cross a bridge, but it was broken. The original path was submerged by water. That's because at dawn the tide would recede, making the path visible. That's why they would wait and do maintenance until the right time. Dong wanted to know why that bridge was destroyed. The scientist says it was probably because of a meteor. The meteor destruction system was deactivated. Fortunately, the emergency power was still working. This meant they could use the reconnaissance radar, remembering that they needed to track where the ship was to go to it. They ascend the communication balloon, and the scientist said it was time to report to that little robot at their base about the mission's progress. The girl makes the call and asks if he was listening, and said they managed to arrive at the location. The robot asks about the situation of the base, and she explains about being outside waiting for daybreak. He asked if there was nobody at the place and warns that the former commander was named Paraka. Even if nobody was there, the robot Heiji warns to be careful. They still had a lot of energy and would keep searching at dawn. She asks her father if he felt any trace of the Guritas. He says no, but near the base he could feel that there were some monsters. It was as if those creatures exhaled a scent that was slightly perceptible. The day finally dawns. It was cloudy and raining, but they would need to continue with the mission. Suddenly the weather changed, getting dark. The rain then caused storms. They were at a lookout near the base that was on an island. The scientist begins to explain the plan, saying they were very close to the base. When the tide went down, they could go around toward the island. But they should be careful because the creatures appeared when the tide lowered. He explains he could smell the creatures even if faintly. And about creatures inside the base he wouldn't know. But one thing was certain, they would have to fight to get there. The girl finds something. It seemed to be combat-related objects. These were Boomian's items, and her father said they brought memories of the past. The warehouse was messy and she could smell the creatures inside. They could be pups of the Guritas, some similar species. And to reassure them, the scientist says to stay calm because they were no longer in that warehouse. Before anything, they decide to eat to prepare, but Ingress tells Dong he would need to moisten that food bar, and so they prepare for the mission the next day. It was delicious to eat something different from mushrooms. That protein bar gave a lot of sustenance. The scientist says to rest well because tomorrow the mission will be difficult, and they should hope it's not raining. But the rain had not stopped. They couldn't postpone one more day, and that's why they were preparing. They brought the most effective weapons to defeat the monsters. The girl's father tells everyone to get in the car because they would depart, and so they head toward the island. The tide had gone down and it was possible to cross by walking. Those creatures were sneaky and they would need to stay alert. The biggest concern was the bridge collapsing while they passed under it. Since it was raining, it was harder to smell the creature's pheromones. Langat notices an obstacle ahead. The stones had collapsed, blocking the path. They would have to clear the way because outside the mud would trap the car. So they go there to break the stones and start hitting with sledgehammers. It would be dangerous to attract the monsters because of the noise. But they had no other choice. The scientist asks Dong to look ahead. That's because there was some creature standing in the middle of the path. The girl warns from afar that there are several enemies behind them. There were dozens of Gurutas approaching. Upon realizing they were coming toward her, she starts shooting. Our hero warns he will finish clearing the debris so they can escape. But right at his side, one of the monsters emerges from the mud. At that moment, he hesitates whether to fight the creature or keep clearing the path. However, Gurutas start to dig themselves out, and they were very close to our protagonist to attack him. One of them jumps toward him. At the last second, someone fires a shot, saving our hero. Ingress was inside the car and tells him to run inside. The boy starts running desperately while the creatures chased him. It was a huge number of monsters, and they begin to speed the car to escape. The worst part is that these creatures could call reinforcements. And that's exactly what was happening. Outside, Dong manages to hit some hammer blows on the creatures' heads. But something was catching his attention. From afar, he saw a light shining above the bridge. It was as if someone was there, and this person turned on a light again, signaling. He was understanding that light signal, so he asked Langat to adjust the radio signal to frequency 70. She asked him to open the side ear cover, and started adjusting the radio on his helmet, moving the device to the correct frequency. Thus, he began analyzing the radio frequencies that could be transmitted by that person on the bridge. Again, the signal started arriving with a code emitted by the flashlight. It was a robot from his crew trying to contact Dong. Finally, they managed to reach the correct frequency, and Alexia asks if he is a member of the Atalante crew, and to confirm asks him to declare affiliation, rank, and code name. She needed this information to confirm his identity. Then Dong says his name and the other information she asked. After that, Alexia confirms the identity and asks for instructions from the maintenance team leader. With that, he orders Alexia to provide fire support. And from the bridge, she starts aiming at the creatures around the vehicle. He confirms, saying she can shoot. And thus he got a new ally in his mission. Since she was in a privileged position, she could have an advantage in shooting. And with that, she started eliminating the creatures from above. Alexia's shots were accurate since she was an android. And they began to feel relieved because she could. And so they start entering the base inside the island. However, the creatures were still chasing them, and our hero was out of battery to keep shooting. He asks the android to release some weapons for them to use. And in response, Alexia says she will provide batteries. That was enough, so he orders her to move position. The girl, who was also by his side shooting, asks if that robot was an ally, and he said yes. She would open the doors so they could enter the fortress. She had reached the designated position and asks for combat information about the enemies. He explains that these creatures have bodies similar to vertebrates. These here were a slightly smaller version of the Gurutas. And even though they were smaller, they were strong and fast. Besides, they were intelligent because they could even hold Dong's hammer. He mentions these creatures are clever, and one creature ends up pulling him off the vehicle. The girl screams, worried about her companion. Then she jumps, trying to hold him. She manages to save him, preventing Dong from falling onto the car. Dong thanks her for saving him. There was a sharp curve ahead and they would need to hold tight. The creatures kept chasing, and already inside, Alexia starts shooting the monsters. Little by little, she was eliminating them one by one. Since he had provided information about the aliens, she was able to choose the most effective weapon. Soon after, Dong tells them to hold their weapons and move forward. He goes to talk to the android and perform the ocular recognition. After that, she confirms his identity. It was necessary to do this confirmation so he could give complex orders to the robot. Now he could give the important mission protocol, which was to protect the team's life. According to the Arcadia mission protocol, all entities were hostile, and that's why the androids were trained to defend humans. She jumps toward the aliens and starts fighting all of them. Those monsters were powerful, But Alexia was made for combat and thus manages to defeat several of them. It seemed these monsters would not give up until they satisfied their hunger. Dong takes advantage to shoot since they were at some distance. She warns the crew to hide and that she would stay behind. And after eliminating all the monsters, she would go after them. But our protagonist says she wouldn't need to defeat them all, just enough to escape alive. The scientist was managing to open the doors and asked the human if it was reliable to trust that robot. He appears and says yes because she stayed behind so they could escape. But they were not trusting the android much. Dong tries to calm them, saying Alexia was created to help survive outside the ship. In other words, she was created precisely for combat, and we see that she really was very powerful. However, the monsters kept coming. It was as if thousands of Guritas appeared at every moment. But she continues outside, spinning around all of them. Without showing any emotion, he tells the scientist to open the door because Alexia was already returning. And so he pulls the lever. The robot was returning to them so they could enter safely. And she comes illuminating the corridor. The battle had been intense and she warns that it weakened the horde of creatures. I don't know about you, but just looking at her face I also get suspicious. The young man says she did a great job and she asks if these were his companions. Then he introduces them, saying they are Boomians and their names are Langat and Ingress. She asks if by any chance they understand the human language. And our protagonist said yes. However, she didn't trust them and pointed her weapon. The boy asks what Alexia was doing and orders her to put that blade on the ground. However, the android girl insists that he translate those words for the Boomians. She says it was they who shot down the Atalanti ship. The mood gets tense. And our hero confirms with the scientist if he had understood what she said, since she spoke in English. The scientist confirms, saying it was their species who shot down the Atalanti ship. The android warns them not to act with hostility since the girl was holding a weapon. And Alexia still warns if she lost control of her blade something bad could happen. And the damage would be irreparable. Our hero warns again for her to drop the weapon. And the scientist says he will answer any questions they have. The first thing Alexia would like to know is why they shot down the ship. The guy says they didn't order the attack. In fact, it was other Boomians, and it was an autonomous decision of the attack satellite. She asks if by any chance he has contact with others of his species. And in response he says that in the current situation trying to communicate with others would basically be asking to die. At that moment he started speaking without an accent, showing that he knew the human language very well. He warns that long ago the Guritas were only wild and fierce animals that attacked the peoples of this world. However, there was a positive side to the attacks of the Guritas, and to fight them the Korok was created. And the Boomians began working hard on technological advancement. And they stopped using simple blade weapons. Those swords until then were their only forms of defense. Then they discovered that those Guritas came to this planet riding meteors. What they thought were wild animals were actually space-invading beings. Shocked by this, they created a planetary cooperation system. That's why they created a mechanism to intercept meteors that fell on the planet. However, moments later they discovered there was a supermassive meteor that could destroy the planet Boomi. This meteor was gigantic. The Great Assembly decided to migrate to another planet and restart life there. And that's when all the problem began. Those with central roles in the system said they would leave first to handle a pioneer mission. Those who had not been chosen began to rebel. And so the planet Boomi split. Some fought until the end for their survival, trying to escape the planet. But those they trusted ended up betraying everyone. And we see that several Boomians ended up being eliminated in this war. Also, the most powerful could escape alive. It was a dark war. And to protect his daughter he had to escape to a distant place. And ended up taking the little one with him inside a bunker. He did that so they could survive. Otherwise he would be eliminated with all the others who stayed behind. And Alexia asks why then he accepted Dom. In response he said the young man spoke of the Atalanti engine that could destroy the approaching meteor. In other words, the boy was the last hope. The android asks our hero if he believes what they are saying and he said yes. However, that was not enough for her to believe. However, if he had arrived alone on this planet and did not trust anyone, he would not be alive. In other words, it was necessary to trust each other. If he didn't trust them, surely the Arcadia project mission would have been in vain. And even if they managed to escape the planet with the ship, they wouldn't find any other habitable planet. Alexia said she understood everything. According to the team protection protocols, she had to verify their identity. And with that she would reduce the alert level. Now she would trust them a little more. And still asks Dong what was their objective upon arriving at this base on the island. In fact, this place controlled the low-altitude reconnaissance satellites. When the tide was high, those creatures managed to enter the base, so they needed to act quickly. They should activate the system to find the ship and leave quickly from there. The father and daughter agree with that, and so they decide to work together to save this planet since it was their last hope. The Ingress says that the corridor leads to the command center on the 3rd floor of the central tower. His daughter could sense the Gurita's pheromones, so they should prepare for combat. And there really was a monster far away. In part 1, you said that this alien language is inspired by a language spoken in Indonesia. And I researched that Gurita in that language means octopus. Dong shoots the creature, and even asks if this Gurita was the same species as the others, since the size and movement are different. The girl said these creatures were born at an early stage of development. They looked a lot like ancestors in an embryonic state, but when they were about to be born, they evolved into this current form. It's as if they were born at a different stage than those bigger aliens. In other words, they are less evolved because they were born prematurely. One question from our hero was how they could sense pheromones to call for help when it was raining. In response, she said it's because of electricity, and he asks if the monsters could use radio waves. In fact, they could produce bioelectricity, especially when it was raining. And he even imagines that the debris on the road was there by the aliens' own order. Dong asks Alexia if she had ever seen anything like it, and she said no. At that moment, the girl smells a strong scent of pheromones, but our hero saw nothing ahead, and even asks if they were behind them. To the guy's misfortune, monster saliva drips on his arm. The creatures were above them. The creature falls on top of our hero, and ends up hitting his helmet with a powerful blow. He feels the impact. Holding his weapon, he starts firing multiple shots. When he gets up, he asks if his companions were okay, and realizes that they were all being attacked too. The girl defended herself as best she could, while the android took them down effortlessly. At that moment, Dong tells them to move forward, as the monsters were coming, and they all start running from the creatures. However, the monsters were faster, and they managed to catch up with them in seconds. So the android moves forward to protect the scientist, and manages to eliminate the creature with her weapon. Ingress thanks Alexia, and starts to trust her a little more. Meanwhile, they were moving through the tunnels, but a Gurita blocked the way. They were face to face. Then Dong asks Langit to get his plasma cutter. She takes the weapon from behind her back, and they go side by side, clearing the way and taking down the monsters. It seemed endless, as more kept coming. With the plasma blade, she manages to cut an alien in half. Our protagonist asks the scientist for help. That's because they had just reached a crossroads. The man says to turn right, and they end up going that way to check if it was safe. But that's exactly where the Guritas were coming from. Dong even thinks this will never end. After long minutes, they manage to find the exit, and he alerts the scientist through the helmet radio that they are safe. They had stayed behind to open the doors with the lever. While he worked on the equipment, Alexia covered him. On the radio, he says the lower floor was clear. With that, our hero decides to go down there. The path was locked, and they couldn't open it with the lever, so they needed to find another way to get there, since Langit could smell Boomian pheromones. Ingress understands and says he will try to open this other door. He pulls the lever, but it seems the door was stuck, so they need to push it with their own hands. They hear a Boomian noise and say they are part of the defense, so they should be calm. From behind the rubble, the man asks if they really were from the defense force. The scientist said yes and asks the man to come out from behind. Raising his hands, the man says he belongs to Taiganoba 76, the former Northern Research Group, and his name was Taras. Ingress asks what he was doing in a place like this. And desperate, the man said he was running from traitors, and was lucky to hide there, but had gotten separated from his family. He starts asking for help to find his Mokura. Our hero imagines that this word Mokura means family, and the man starts crying, begging them to help. Dong asks Ingress if he was referring to his wife and children, and the scientist confirms yes. Speaking in the Boomian language, he asks which department Taras worked in. He was from the secretary's office, and his direct superior was named Mora. With that, Ingress confirms he was telling the truth, and starts entering the place, asking everyone to lower their weapons. He knew who this man was, and had already worked with him. Upon learning it was the scientist Ingress, the man said he remembers him because they did research together, and he starts begging them to help save his wife and child. Alexia said they can't waste time saving other people because the mission's priority is to recover Atalante's parts. The man asks what that is, and Dong tells the man to think of that android as if it were an alien who came to save this planet. Then the man asks if that propulsion unit that fell near the research group belonged to them. Curious, our hero asks him to tell the details. The man saw a huge piece of ship fall with solar panels and the drawing of a humanoid. That was exactly what Dong was looking for, and the man knew where it was. If they help search for his family, he will guide them to the place where the wreckage fell. He asks Alexia if this would be useful for the mission, and she says the success rate would increase by 36%. So he decides to help Taras's family, and tells the scientist that this could be useful. Ingress asks if the man has any idea how to escape this base. He says there's a Barra Langita in the upper hangar, but he didn't know how to operate it. Ingress knows how to control it, and tells Dong that the Barra Langita is like a ship. While he went to the hangar to get the aircraft, he should search for Taras's family. Since it would be riskier, it was better for Dong to take Alexia and Langita. The man is grateful. However, our hero thought it would be better for the girl to go along with her father, She was crying, and he asked if she was okay. Actually, she just felt sympathy for that man. The scientist agrees to take his daughter to protect him, and Dong promises he will return with everyone safe. They start descending into the depths of the base. They had walked quite a bit, and the man said his family was in the submarine hangar, at the lowest level of the fortress. On the radio, the scientist asks if Dong has reached the place, and he says he's getting close. Ingress was almost done assembling the aircraft. Some parts still needed to be fitted. Since the radio was silent, the scientist asked if Dong was okay, and the guy said they had just found Terrace's family. He had reunited with his wife and son, and they hugged. On the radio, the scientist told them to return immediately. The man introduces his family to our hero and to the android, saying they are aliens from planet Earth. Speaking in the Boomian language, he introduces himself and says they need to leave quickly because it was dangerous there. As they walked, they felt some tremors. On the radio, Ingress said it could be the gates opening. There was a submarine down there, and they decided to get closer. The place gave them chills, and they thought Guritas could appear at any moment, and that's exactly what happens. The monsters start arriving. Ingress asks on the radio if Dong can see the hangar, but he couldn't see anything. So they start running another way, trying to reach the east zone. He alerts the scientist on the radio so he'll know where to find them. After knowing the location, he boards the ship to meet them there, and with that they end up confirming the location. The exit was around the next corner. They were already very close to getting out. However, they end up shocked. It was a dead end, and the monsters were right behind them. Taurus says they could open that door manually. They just needed to pull the left lever. He goes there to try to open the doors, but the water starts rising in the hangar. They panic, imagining they could drown. Alexia manages to save the man's wife and tells her to be careful with the electric shocks. So our hero asks the android to pull the lever. After climbing back up to the platform, Taurus tells his wife and son to go first. The two put in a lot of effort to pull the lever. And then the mechanisms start working, and the gate opens. Now they could finally get out of there. However, the gate ends up closing again. It would only stay open if someone held the lever longer. They hear shouts telling them to run quickly. And when they look back, it was Taurus holding that lever, so they could escape. Dong asks if the man is sure about this. Then the android slaps our hero on the back so he'll run, and so they start escaping the place. The gates were open, and the man shouts loudly, telling the location of the ship's wreckage. He said it was in the Sulphur Stone area, southwest of the Northern Research Group headquarters. And as the monster approached, he asks Dong to protect his family. Our hero says goodbye to him, confirming that he will protect them, and the monster keeps coming after them. Then they are attacked, and the impact throws them far away. The little boy is hurled several meters high, but Dong manages to reach in time and protects the boy so he won't hit the ground hard. As he gets up, he asks if the boy is okay, and the boy says yes. Arriving with the aircraft, the scientist says on the radio that they must leave immediately because they were surrounded. There were Guritas everywhere, and the guy is already starting to panic. Meanwhile, Alexia was buying time, taking down several creatures. There was a giant alien that could release electric shocks, and the android ends up being electrocuted and falls unconscious. Dong was face to face with this huge monster, and it seemed everything was lost. Thus, we finish part 2 of this story. I summarized all the chapters of this work, and if you want the continuation, leave a like and a comment. When the next chapters come out, I'll bring you the summary here. I'll also recommend other works here on the channel that I'm sure you'll like. So that's it, guys. See you next time.